What's up guys, my name is Ace, and Season 5 Reloaded in Modern Warfare 3 brought us the Spear melee weapon. And in today's video, we're going to be doing a deep dive to compare it to the other melee weapons, and also look at its unique characteristic, and that is you can throw this. But first, we're just going to focus on the melee ability of this, so just poking somebody with the spear, not throwing. And we're going to compare it to the other melee weapons in the game. And the first thing to note is this will be a one-hit kill in core game modes. It deals exactly 150 damage. Then when it comes to our pre-hit delay, so the amount of time it takes from the moment you press the button to the moment you actually hit the enemy player, this is 267 milliseconds, which is right in the realm of standard for a melee weapon. It's the same story with our swipe speed, so the time between two hits, and this just applies if you miss the first stab, for instance, or maybe there's two enemies side by side. How long does it take to kill both of them? Well, with this one, it's once again standard at 517 milliseconds. And now let's have a look at our lunge range, which is ridiculous. This is 4.1 meters, which is by far the best in the game. In fact, that's even better than the heavy attack on both the Sledgehammer and the Gladiator, which just recently got a heavy attack. And yet you don't have the downsides of a heavy attack attached to this. This is a regular attack at regular speed. So that is pretty insane with the spear. However, there is a bit of a trade-off to that, and that is our maximum hit angle is just 15 degrees. And this means you can't be aiming very far off target for it to essentially lock on and automatically lunge toward the enemy player. You have to be aiming almost right on them when you hit that button in order to actually get the hit, unlike all of the other melee weapons, which are far more forgiving in this sense. Now, is that enough of a drawback for the ridiculous lunge range at 4.1 meters? Probably not. I mean, I think that's pretty crazy compared to the other ones. And the fact that you have to aim a little closer to your target isn't extremely difficult by any means. But next, before we get into the throwing mechanics, let's also have a look at our movement speed, since this is a very important stat with the melee weapons, because it determines how quickly you can get around the map and how fast you can close the distance when you actually run into an enemy player. And this is an area where the spear absolutely doesn't excel. It's got the worst mobility across the board when it comes to melee weapons in the game. Our base movement speed is only 4.72 meters per second, our sprint speed is 6.17 meters per second, and our tactical sprint speed is 7.41 meters per second. All of these movement speeds are the worst in the melee category by a noticeable margin as well, so this is going to be moving quite noticeably slower than the others. And that trade-off, combined with the fact that you have to be a bit more accurate with this compared to the other melee weapons, it starts to make up for that amazing lunge range, although I still find that to be a pretty crazy range. And with that out of the way, now it's time to move into the other characteristic of the spear, and this is the fact that you can throw the spear instead of just using it as a melee weapon. So with this, when you throw it, we still deal exactly 150 damage anywhere in the body. There's no separate body multipliers here, so it is a one-hit kill against full health enemies in core modes. We also have a small pre-throw delay with this, so it doesn't throw immediately when you press the button. There's a roughly 217 millisecond delay from the moment you press the button to the moment you actually release the spear from your hand, and I do want to break that up into two separate parts. The first part is the wind-up animation, so if you haven't touched the buttons at all, and then you go to throw the spear, there's a roughly 67 millisecond wind-up, and then the additional 150 milliseconds, that's what happens once you release the button. So even if you pre-wind up and you're preparing for an enemy, and you hold down the trigger first to pull that spear back, it's still going to take you 150 milliseconds after you release the button before the spear actually leaves your hand. And then, of course, on top of that, it does fly fairly slow, especially if you were to compare it to like a bullet, for instance. Obviously, it's going to be flying significantly slower. So you may have to lead your target a bit, depending on whether or not they're moving and what range they're at. And another thing is you have to compensate for that drop as well. You will have to aim a little bbit high as you stretch out your ranges, since it obviously doesn't have the best trajectory out there. As for our rate of fire with these spears, so if you want to spam them quickly, maybe there's two enemies and you want to get two throws off really quickly, or you missed your first throw and you need that follow-up one. Well, it turns out we throw these spears at 47 rounds per minute, so that's like a slow bolt-action rifle essentially. And that means you definitely want to try to make sure that you aren't missing your shot or not taking on multiple enemies if you're planning on throwing the spear, because that's over a second between each throw, and that's plenty of time for those enemies to kill you many, many times over. Additionally, if you're planning on throwing the spear, there is a sprint out time to deal with as well. So not just that pre-throw time of 217 milliseconds, but on top of that, there's going to be a sprint out time. And I'll admit this one is quite difficult to test with hand testing, but to the best of my ability, it appears with a standard sprint, our sprint out time will be roughly 200 milliseconds. So total time to actually throw the spear is going to be a little over 400 milliseconds when you also account for that pre-throw delay. Whereas if you're in a tactical sprint, it looks like your sprint out time is going to be 300 milliseconds. So now it's going to take you over half a second to get that throw off. So generally speaking, if you want to be throwing the spear, you don't want to be sprinting into a fight. Now, when it comes to this, we actually carry a maximum of 3 spears in our inventory at any given time, and you will spawn in with 3 as well. And the spears can be retrieved after you throw them just by running over them. You don't have to press any buttons or anything like that. If you end up throwing all 3 of your spears, it will auto default to you just using your fists at that point. So that's another thing to consider as well. If you are planning on using it as a melee weapon, you got to make sure you're keeping 1 in your inventory, otherwise you're using your fists, and that obviously won't be a one-hit melee kill anymore. Now, another thing that I found interesting is if you use the Scavenger perk, just picking up 1 Scavenger pack will immediately replenish all 3 spears in your inventory. Even if you've thrown all of your spears and you only have fists left in that weapon slot, it will replenish your spears and you'll be back to having 3 of them. And that can be really helpful if you are going spear only, because sometimes you're going for a bit of a longer throw and it's just not realistic to go and retrieve that spear. With Scavenger, you just have to pick up 1 pack and you're back to max ammo. Next, another characteristic I tested with the spear when throwing it is how does it interact with a trophy system? Will a trophy system destroy a thrown spear? And the answer to that is no, the spear will ignore the trophy system entirely, so that's excellent to see. And on top of that, if you want to use your spear to destroy the trophy system, it just takes 1 spear throw. Now, one final unique characteristic I wanted to look at when it comes to throwing the spear is the fact that you can actually get collateral kills with this. So if there are 2 enemies that are lined up and close together, you can kill both of them with a single spear throw. However, the moment that spear hits the first person, it does lose most of its momentum and the trajectory drops off pretty quickly. So it's not like it's going to travel through them and then carry on for a really long distance. But if somebody happens to be standing like right behind them, you can absolutely get collateral kills with this. And this just leaves us with one last thing I wanted to test, and this is, how does a spear behave against Riot Shield users? Is this a viable counter to a Riot Shielder, or not? And when it comes to the melee ability of the spear, it turns out this does nothing against Riot Shielders. The shield will block the melee attack, just like with most melee weapons. And then when it comes to throwing the spear, unfortunately, it's the same result. It's not a counter to the Riot Shield. The Riot Shield will block a thrown spear as well. So unlike a couple of the other melee weapons, this is not a counter to the Riot Shield. And there we go. That's finally going to wrap it up for the breakdown of the brand new spear melee weapon in Modern Warfare 3. And overall, when it comes to my thoughts on this, I actually quite enjoy it. I think it was a good addition to the game. Again, just like with the compound bow that they added, it's just something that's different. There's nothing else quite like this in the game. So it offers a unique new playstyle to mess around with. I do think the lunge range is probably a little bit overtuned at this point. Despite the fact that there are some trade-offs, I still think that lunge range is a little bit too crazy considering the fact that this isn't even a heavy attack, and yet it's outpacing the heavy attacks of other melee weapons. And then on top of that, you get the added benefit of being able to throw the spear, which I find to be really fun and a nice challenge as well. It's not easy to consistently hit throws with the spear, especially against moving enemies. So in general, I do think this was a great addition to the game. Now, of course, these are just my opinions, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about the spear in those comments down below. Are you guys generally happy with the addition of this? Do you not like the fact that they added this? And what do you guys think of that current 4.1 meter lunge range when using this as a melee weapon? If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.